My name is Brendan Brathwaite, and I'm a game designer. I've been a game designer since I was 15. I made my first game at 5, and nobody wanted to play it, but I'll talk to you about that today, probably wisely. Hang on a sec, I just got to get this so it feels more comfortable and my air doesn't go flinging. All right, so this is a talk about how I dumped electricity, which may seem like an odd thing, and unfortunately I need electricity to tell you about it, I guess. And it really made me love design. So bear in mind, I've been a game designer professionally for 29 years. So to say, and I'm wearing 6-inch heels, so if I fall off the stage, this is going to be really fun today, so record. Anyway, this is about the process of design. How many game designers are in the room? That's so not surprising. Okay, so with design, like when we think of design, it can mean many different things to many different people, but for me, the process of design is like looking at the entire world, right? Hold on, I want to move this computer because it's driving me nuts where it is. There, that's way better. All right, so I'm thinking about the entire world and what I'm going to do and what's going to be there. And for me, it's really blue sky. At this point in time, and with all due respect to programmers, I don't care about you. This is about what I want to do, because eventually I know when I tell you what I want to do, you're going to tell me that's impossible or crazy. But at this point in time, I'm just thinking about the world, and I'm thinking about all the people that are going to be in my world and the awesome things that we're going to do and the places we're going to go and the scary things that we're going to see. And for me, really, game design at its rawest form is this absolutely beautiful, amazing, magical place, and it's ridiculous I get paid to do this for a living. And it's also my happy place. Like, I honestly, like when I say I go to my happy place, odds are I'm thinking up a game. Sometimes just challenging myself in like ridiculous ways. Like if I wanted to make a game right now live, what type of game would I make? And other designers in the room, and there are some of them, I could probably name them by name, actually started thinking, oh, that would be possibly interesting. Here's what I would do. And they're not listening anymore. Hi, Ian. Anyway, so for me and for many other designers, when we're thinking about a game, we're actually there. Whether that game world exists or not, it doesn't matter. In fact, when I'm designing a console game, my eyes are closed, I have the controller in my hand, and I'm playing that game in my head, even if a line of code hasn't at all been written. Because to me, game design equals play. I am trying to solve a significant problem. At least in my head. So here's where my game design starts, right? I'm 5, and I come across these magical, wonderful Legos. And I build a level, and nobody wants to play. But I knew how to get through that level. I knew the puzzles that were in that level. I knew the challenges that people were going to face. And it was really pretty awesome. And so when I transitioned to digital Legos not much later on, when I go to these things, it feels the same to me. I'm still building worlds. I mean, there's this machine in between us, but it still feels very much the same. And this may seem like an odd picture to have in a game design talk, except for many designers, I interviewed a bunch of people on the Project Horseshoe mailing list. I asked them this question: do you guys feel a need to build things with your hands? And many game designers do, whether it's cooking or whatever. And in fact, if you feel a need to code, I consider code building things with your hands as well. And so for me, it was very similar. And so this is eventually what game design starts to look like for me. These actually come from a friend of mine, Sherry Grainer-Ray, who had no idea she was going to end up in my talk when she sent me these things. And these, I don't know if these are from Ultima or not, but Sherry worked on the Ultima series while I worked on the Wizardry series. And so, this is sort of what game design looks like, and these don't look much like Legos, right? Although this theoretically could. This picture still cracks me up because, so bear in mind, Wizardry was a first person, you're walking through the maze first person. And it kills me that Sherry on graph paper still draws her worlds to look like Ultima. Even though it's suboptimum, but whatever. Okay, and so menu structures, and these don't necessarily look very fun, and the design doesn't feel as cool as it does to build with Legos. But it is. I don't want to say like it sucks, because design has never sucked to me. Like I know people who are saying on Monday morning they have to go work at an insurance company. And Monday morning I'm going to go make shit up, and other people are going to pay to have it made. That's awesome. So it's still a lot of fun no matter what. But it now sort of looks, well, the handoff, yeah. So it looks sort of like this, right? It's a whole group of people, and it's no longer just me in a game. In fact, it might be me and 10 other people or 20 other people. And I've worked on teams as large as, well, I don't even really know what the number was. But it was big. It was over 100. And it was me, and there were 7 other senior designers, and we had junior designers, and there was a design director, and it was a big team. So this concept of me and the Legos sort of ends up like this, right? There's the Legos, and there's a zillion people who've got the Legos, right? And I'm just sort of feeling like, can I have some Legos, please? And the answer, of course, is take your 3 Legos and shut up and go deal with your 3 Legos. And you don't necessarily feel how your system is interacting with other things, and it doesn't always feel so great. But that said, there still is that moment when a game comes together where for me it's a happy place. You don't do this for 29 years without absolutely loving it unless you're insane, which, is possible, I suppose. But anyway, so this is how it goes. It's, the idea goes to the team, which becomes a game. hopefully, or it becomes an abomination, which of course none of us are trying to get. But sometimes design also feels like work, right? Like I love math, and so this is a fortunate thing that I can go in and I can lose myself in an Excel spreadsheet. By the way, I talk fast. Why I decided to slow down to tell you that, I have no idea. So hopefully and I've had 5 cups of espresso. So I'm probably talking much faster than I normally would. Anyway, no, I'm not. But sometimes design equals work, and it becomes our job. And we've all worked on parts of a game where like, please let this game end or kill me. We've all been at that point in a game where we're feeling that, and then eventually it comes around. Maybe it's like you're half sleep deprived. But I decided to wonder, like, what if design really equaled play? Again, like, what if I could really have that feeling that design was just play, and it was a pure sense of play, and that instead of going idea, team, game, it was just idea, game. Like, forget the team. And I felt like this desire to make a game all by myself again. And I wanted to, and I could, because, I didn't have a publisher. I was at the time the chair of a department at a college, so I was consulting for a lot of different companies in the game industry, but I wanted to make a game just because I could without commercial pressure. And so it's me and my world and the people and the places we're going to go, and I'm largely happy, right? So, and that's not me, in case you're wondering, as a kid, that was not a picture of me. So let me give you a random, although it's a very cute kid. Anyway, so this is an obviously planned random tangent. So I have a revolt, right? And here's the revolt. I had a play pile at the time, and I would just buy games and put them on the play pile. And just so happened the order of those particular games were 3 first-person shooters. And I happened to play them back to back to back. And these weren't arranged in any particular way. And after the third one, I'm like, this is the same game. One is more gray than the other, but it's largely the same game. And it was just boring. And I felt like really, what has changed since the original first-person shooter? So I called a friend of mine who's intimately familiar with first-person shooter development, and I said, what the hell has changed? And his answer was more polygons. There's way more polygons now. But other than that, the core play was pretty much the same. And so I had this revolt. I'm like, you know what? Just for 9 months, I don't know where this number comes from, but for 9 months I decide I'm not going to play any digital games at all. None. And I haven't done this since, I don't know, probably when I was 2 months old. Whatever. So I have a revolt, and I go absolutely batshit crazy on board games. Now, this is not a new foray to me. I somehow managed to get a copy of the white box edition. My mom got me the white box edition when I was 11 years old. So I started playing D&D very early as a kid, and I started making my own board games in my own worlds pretty early on as well. So I started playing a ton of board games, and I'm absolutely having a blast with these board games. And so another random tangent is that I'm having a dinner. Well, I'm not having a dinner. The college that I worked for at the time was having a dinner, and my job as a chair of that college department was to eat, primarily. And so we were out at dinner, and there's all these people around the table, and one of these guys is Zig Jackson. So Zig Jackson is a Native American. He's also an incredibly famous photographer. And Zig goes around. He has this great sign, Zig's Reservation, and he takes it and he just puts it in the most seemingly ridiculous places and takes photographs of them. And he was at this particular dinner, and we were talking about his work. Here's one of his pieces here, which is a rain dance. And this is another one. Now, this one is maybe not obvious, but this is from the Degradation series. And in this series, it includes some other pictures, like my favorite titled one is Indian taking pictures of white men taking pictures of Indians. And so just think about this. We've got this, Indian in this picture dressed very traditionally. But just imagine, for one moment, put any other race in that picture. And imagine that you're asking this person to pose with you. Hey, honey, look, it's an African American. Can you come here so my kids can take a picture with you? Like, OMFG, WTF, right? Like, seriously, nobody would do this. Hey, let's get the nice white lady. Come here, white lady. Like, seriously, it's nuts, right? Nobody would do this. And so he's taking these pictures of what's happened, how this culture's been squashed down, sort of like my culture, when I think my culture does not equal Guinness and potatoes, right? It's a whole lot more than that, which is Irish, if you somehow didn't pick it up. Anyway, so this is part of his series, and Zig is talking with this other photographer who also happens to be there. And in this conversation, Zig is relaying this point about how he goes to an Indian reservation. There had been a shooting on the reservation, and 5 people had been killed. And so he goes there because he's a photographer, and he's going to take some pictures, not for commercial purposes. He's just going to take pictures because he's a photographer, and he feels the need to document it. But he says he gets there, and he can't do it. He just can't take the pictures. And so this amazing conversation erupts between him and this other photographer where they're talking about how do you decide whether you'll take the picture or not. And if you think for even 10 seconds, try to picture 5 famous photographs in your head, like really famous ones. Odds are those photographs are capturing pain, at least one of them. And the amazing part about it is the ability of a photograph to just nail that, right? To capture and express that emotion. And that, the amazing part of a great photographer is that he or she can do that. And so I started to think, why can't we do that with games? Like, could we make a game so it would capture and express a difficult emotion just like that in a single image? And I was utterly fascinated by that. Now, the odd part is after this dinner, I go home and I finished writing. I was working on a writing project in the time in which I was telling people how to kick ass and take over the world. So do you take the picture or not? Do you make the game or not? And so this question is in my head, and I'm thinking about how literally every other medium, painting, music, you name it, every other medium has the ability to do this and has done it, but games haven't. So then I've got this other random tangent. And it was my daughter. So she comes home from school. She is now 9, but at the time she was 7. And she comes home from school, and I say, "What did you guys learn about today?" And talk about today, and she says, the Middle Passage. So her dad is half black and half Irish, and I know this moment is coming, right? And it's not a like, oh no moment. It's just important. It's about our culture. So I ask her about this, and her response, and those of you who are parents in the room will appreciate that my daughter's going to do very well on testing because she learned the buzzwords sans all emotion. So I said, what did you think of that? And her response was, So basically, the ships come down from England, they go over to Africa, they get black people, they put them on a ship, they sail across the ocean, and then they're sold into slavery. However, Abraham Lincoln was elected president, he passed the Emancipation Proclamation, and now they're all free. Pause. Mommy, can I play a game? And so, here's the Middle Passage. And the way she described it was the black people went on a cruise, right? And I basically, this just is making like no sense to me, right? So she asked if she could play a game, and my answer was yes. And I hand her a bunch of these. And these things, I mean, if you're a game designer, in my house, I have random prototype parts. I'm sure that's endemic to 12 people on the planet. So I have prototype parts just because I never know when I want to make a game. So I hand Mesa, that's her name, I hand her about 40 of these people. And so this is what I tell her to do. I ask her to make me some families. And so she spent about a half an hour with these characters, and you can see how their families, they're the reds and the purples and the greens. And so she creates these families, and then when she's done creating them and they've dried a little bit, I grab them and I put them on the boat. And this was the boat. I had an index card, which is the #1 primary tool of game prototyping. So I put a bunch of these characters on a boat, and so she starts pushing. I just randomly grabbed them, and she's like, "Well, you forgot the baby," and she starts putting the yellow baby with the other ones. And I said, "No, honey, he can't go." And you forgot the father, and she's trying to get the families all on the boat. And I said, "Honey, they can't come." And she says, "They want to go." And I said, "Maisie, it's the Middle Passage. Nobody wants to go." And so she gave me this bizarre look that suggests that my prototype is broken, And so I explained to her, that no, just trust me on this. My prototype is not broken, and this is the way this works. And so I make up these rules on the spot. So spare me the critique, because this game happened in 4 seconds. So it takes 10 turns to get across the ocean. We've got 30 units of food. Each turn she has to roll a die, and we're going to use that amount of food. Mesa's rolling super high. And at some point she says to me, "Mommy, we're not going to make it. What are we going to do?" And so I tell her, she's 7, so I tell her, well, we can either try to make it all the way across and hope that people don't die, or we can put some people in the water. Now, she's 7. She knows what that means. I mean, I could have used stronger words. But I see this look come over her face like, oh, my God. And so she looks up, and at this exact moment she says, "Mommy, did that really happen?" And I said, "Yeah, it really happened." And we had this amazing talk like, so if I came out of the woods, is it possible you would have been gone? Yeah, it's possible. What about Avalon and Donovan? That's her brother and sister. Yeah, they could have been gone. But did we get together again when we get across the ocean? Do we get together again? No. I mean, if it happens, it's lucky, but no. And, well, do they ever get to come back to Africa? No. Now, mind you, this is after Black History Month in school, right? So did this really happen? Like, what the hell? Did this really happen? What is it, Fiction Month? I mean, it's nuts, right? So I'm like absolutely shocked that this is the conversation that I'm having. So her father comes through the door, and this is her dad. Her father comes through the door, clearly not expecting to walk into the Middle Passage, but this is what he walks into. And so Maze is saying to him, like, what do you think about those people you left behind? Do you ever think about them? Do you know where they are? So you could walk by somebody else and they could be related to you and you might not even know, is that really your last name? And all these amazing questions that came about not because she saw a movie, not because she got a poster, not because she got some dumb interactive lecture, but because she made characters. She spent a half an hour with those characters and those characters mattered to her and those characters' lives were affected by this middle passage that happened on an index card. And I was F-bomb, mind blown by this. This is what the prototype, the bottom of the prototype, this is what it looks like. So some of you may recognize that formation. This game is not yet fully released. It's called The New World, and I'm going to be releasing it at Harvey Smith's house because I can. Anyway, so when this happened to me, I saw the world. I mean, honest to God, this was great. This felt like game design circa 1981. I was astounded. And it was such an amazing feeling to me. And so here was my world, and I was like seriously in bliss. She was crying, I was crying, her father was crying, and it was friggin' amazing. So I immediately decided to do it again. So now it's time to talk about where my people come from. So this should be your first hint. This is my grandfather, Paddy Donovan. He's Czechoslovakian. And I'm kidding, obviously. And this is Ireland. And so my family comes from Cork. We know exactly where we left from. And this is the very first prototype of the Irish game. The Irish game is the only game I've ever made. It's called Síochána Lot, which stands for Peace Be With You in Gaelic. This is the only game that the very first prototype. The game literally showed up finished in my head. That's the very first prototype of it, and the rule set remains unchanged, despite giving it to Ian Schreiber, who is vicious with rules, and having a lot of other people play it. And so I basically create this prototype. And the amazing thing about this is I'm not, so game designers are artists, right? But normally how it goes is I will say, I want my game to do this, that, and the other thing, and it needs to look like this. And then there's the handoff, and I give it to somebody else, except I can't say, I need an army of Irish people, and they need to, of course, be green. Right? And you go figure out what color green. But now nobody's going to do this because I can't say, hey, I'm making an army of Irish people in my kitchen. Would you like to come pick So I'm doing this, and I want to do this all by myself because it's incredibly rewarding. So this is the first series of Irish people. This ended up not working out. So here we can see that the Irish army, this is where I was working on games at the time. We can see that the Irish army is like out of control. There's one Irish army drying. There's another Irish army in the box that didn't quite work out so well. And then we have the other Irish fails that are there when I'm trying to get literally just the right color of green. And what is amazing about this is because there's no publisher who's waiting for my milestone. I can literally work on this for a bazillion friggin' years, and it doesn't matter because I wanted the perfect color of green. I wanted everything about these games to be perfect, so I didn't go, you know what? I'm not as happy with that color green. It could have been a little bit better. There's nothing in my games that I look at and think, no, it could have been a little bit better because I did it. I wanted to do everything right because I've never had the luxury of doing it right. I had the luxury of doing it on time. And you try to get as close to right and on time as possible, right? But I don't know there's a single game designer in the world who's like, no, we shipped perfect. We wouldn't have changed a thing, except maybe one person, but I won't call them out. Anyway, so these are the English. These are the English drying in my backyard. You might wonder why the English are blocks. It's because basically the story of the Irish game is the Cromwellian invasion of Ireland. Cromwell rolls across the northeast of the island, and basically they take about 60% of the Irish land. They displace them. And Cromwell's deal, he said to the English, hey, I got a great idea. You know, the stupid Irish? And the English said, yes, we hate the stupid Irish. I'm going to go kick their ass. This is obviously not in a history book, or it would be phrased a lot differently. Anyway, but my version's more entertaining. So Cromwell says he's going to go kick the Irish ass, and the Irish, so he comes over, and indeed he does kick heavy Irish ass, and he takes the island and he takes the land away from the Irish because the English who funded his war, this is in return, so you give me money for it, I'll give you the land. So he goes back to the English in a nutshell, says, hey, guess what, I kicked the Irish ass and I've got your land for you. And they said, we hate the Irish, we don't want to live in Ireland. So they rent the land back to the same Irish they took it from. So this is why they're abstracted, because they never come here. This is a way that the pieces just happened to, I was sorting them into a box, and that's the way I happened to sort them. I just like that picture quite a bit. So I'll tell you what this is. Actually, I'm going to skip ahead a slide, and then I'll go back to that one. So I'm actually I'm building the game at this point in time. And so you can see, like, each of the posts, there's nothing, and I won't tell you what each one of the things in there, but every single thing you're looking at has meaning. Every single thing. Sid Meier, yesterday he gave his keynote, and he's known for having this line, interesting decisions, or sometimes I've heard it referred to as giving the player meaningful choices. Well, what about us as designers, right? Do we make meaningful design decisions? Like, can you literally say that every decision is meaningful? So you can see, this is absolutely the cheapest shit burlap I could find. And this is representing the Irish earth. And when I went into the store to buy the Irish earth, I saw this amazing brown velvet. It was astonishing. And I thought, well, maybe I should get grayer velvet. But as I'm looking at this, I see this 99 cents a yard burlap. And I know I have to get this. And I can't get it, even though I got to afford something that was $50 a yard. But I have to get this stupid burlap because the entire time I was growing up, I remember this line. Hey, Ma, can we get this? No, it costs too much. No, we don't need it. How much does that cost? Because I grew up in a family, we had $7,000 a year. That was what they made. So I was so used to growing up with nothing. And I was also used to growing up with the land is everything and like constantly hearing that and having my culture reinforced to me. And so everything from the number of stitches on the side to the number of times that I wrapped those poles to the orange poles that are up in the corner. Every single thing in this game has meaning. Now, granted, I understand this is a tremendous luxury, but I would encourage all of you, you can't necessarily sit there and make every single thing incredibly meaningful to you as a designer, but if you have a chance to do something like this, I highly advise it. So now I'm going back to these. You can see this is lumpy, this earth here. So there's stuff in there, and I decided to fill it with everything I knew about my culture. Inside of there's 5 Irish people, the tokens. And be really small Irish people with a big burlap. And yeah, anyway. So I wrapped them up, and the reason I did that is because they say the earth in Ireland is so green because the blood of so many Irish has been shed. And that's really true if you know Irish history. And so I poured everything into there. Inside of this particular thing is my mother's rosary, pictures of my family, there's letters, there's all kinds of stuff in there that is every single thing I think about my history is in that game. And so then I came up with an interesting problem, and I'm going to talk about Horseshoe again in a little bit. But the original thing I was going to do, I was going to put sod there, because when you think of Ireland, you're thinking of the earth. And I forget which game designer that was at Project Horseshoe. It's an invite-only game design conference. Said to me, so Brenda, you're going to ask people to water your game, just to clarify, right? And these games weren't going anywhere at the time. I was just making them because I could. But it was an interesting question because it did seem like a stand, but my game, yes, you can use my game, you can take my game, but please make sure to water it. So then I came up with this idea, well, what if I made grass? So this is actually the only time knitting skills have come in handy for me as a game designer. There's 26 pieces of grass in this game that you're looking at a bunch of them together. 26 pieces of grass that I knitted, and this is the final version of the Irish game. So it's probably stands about this tall. It's 2 by 2, and literally everything you're looking at there has significant meaning to me. So there you are. That was the Irish game. So this is yet another tangent. So I'm listening to this particular woman talk. Her name is Mary Flanagan, and she was speaking at a museum in Savannah, Georgia, and she's a game designer, right? And she's talking about this game, and I can see it because it's on the screen, it's as big as this one, and she says, and my work, and I thought, did she just refer to her game as my work? Because when I think of my work, I think of Michelangelo or Picasso or something I don't think of Settlers of Catan, my work, right? I don't think of it like that, but it was such a weird transformative moment for me to think of my stuff as my work, right? And when she said that, it was wow, and I don't know why, my games have won awards before, but I've never thought of it as my game. But my work, it was this very subtle change in language that really felt incredibly cool, and I thought of games in a different context than I had, and it was really shortly thereafter that I go to Ian Bagost's tenure party. He's at Georgia Tech. He's a game designer and a professor, and I go to his party, and there's a person from the industry there, and so this person says to me, so what are you working on? And this is the standard conversation between game designers and the industry is, what are you working on? I can't say. How about you? Yeah, me neither. And so, the conversation dies right there usually. But so this time I can actually answer, and I say, well, I'm making this interesting series of board games. I'm just, exploring, can you express difficult emotions or capture difficult subjects with a game mechanic? Is that possible? And so she says, well, what are your games about? And I say, well, so, bear in mind I'm living in my own little isolated world at this point in time. And I say, so I've made one that's about the Middle Passage called The New World. And I made one about the Cromwellian invasion of Ireland where all the Irish Catholics get displaced. And when I should say the Irish game, you don't win the Irish game. You lose the least. Because the numbers range between 40,000 and 120,000 Irish get sent to Barbados as slaves. which is why if you've ever been to the island of Barbados, you will see people, people with Gaelic first names like Ian and blue eyes and black skin and this incredible range of people that are, everything from, super light to super dark with lots of Gaelic last names, and it's a really diverse and beautiful culture. Anyway, so they went to Barbados not as indentured servants, but as slaves. So I'm telling her, I've got this game, and then I'm now making a game called Train. And she says, what's that about? And I say, the Holocaust. And she says to me, appropriately, but Brenda, that's not fun. Which, yeah, right? But the point is that I really started to question this at this point in time. Why do games have to be fun? Like, let's just imagine movies, just for a minute. Like, Schindler's List. Oh, Spielberg, come on, man. That's not fun. No other medium is like, oh, it's got to be fun. I'm not going to take the picture. I'm not going to write the book. I'm not going to make that piece of music. Some of my favorite music is not at all fun. I love the blues. But this really sort of shakes my foundations for a second. I already said she, but this is a he. They're interesting for those of you who are confused. Anyway, so I'm at this point in time really sort of thinking like, yeah, why am I doing this? I haven't really talked to a lot of people about it. Why the hell am I doing this? And then I talked to Ian Bogost, and Ian says to me, he says the same question, so what are you working on? And I say, and he now actually knows I'm using this picture, so I don't feel nearly as guilty showing it. So I say to Ian Bogost that I'm making these games, and he says what can be considered the academic line of death, it's interesting, which also means this is an utter waste of my time, please move away. But that's interesting, and then he goes on to say that all the reasons he thinks it's interesting, it could possibly be interesting, and we have this really in-depth conversation about it, and that was also a pivotal moment because it makes me think, yeah, you know what, I'm not publishing these things anyway, I'm not doing anything with them, I'm just going to keep exploring this. So then I decided to do it 4 more times. And I'm literally nuts. I'm so happy with this process right now. I'm having an absolute great time. The number 6 is just my favorite number. It shows up in all my games. It was back when I used to do just system design and we didn't necessarily have credits that great in games. I would put that number in the game many times. It would be a roll. So in case you're wondering if some of the stuff in Wizardry is rigged to go towards 6, the answer is no, but there is 6s that are in there as a direct because I wanted to sign the game in some way. But it was also had to do with this dude, Reiner Knizia. How many of you guys know him? Yay, game designers. Okay, so Reiner Knizia is a pretty prolific board game designer. He's German, as if the name Reiner and Knizia didn't give that away. Anyway, Knizia, I have no idea where I heard this, and I've never been able to substantiate it, but it ended up being something that was important to me. So I hear Knizia makes 6 games at a time. He's working on 6 games at any given time, and I decided that would be an interesting process to see what it would be like to work on 6 games simultaneously. And so I decide to do 1 for each topic. And so so we've got the middle passage, we've got no, at this point I don't have Train, that's right. So I've got 1 of each. And so I've got the one, how they end up, well, I'll tell you after how I get them. I have no idea what I'm going to do with these games, but I'm just going to try to select some fairly large, difficult topics, and see what would happen with them. And I've got, down here this smaller thing that I just added, which I'll tell you about at the end. 2 years later, I realized there may be more to my exploration, than merely just exploring this for the hell of it. And so it goes back again to this question of, can I capture and express difficult emotions with a game mechanic? And one of the easiest things that occurs to me, whenever we're looking at any form of human-on-human tragedy, there simply has to be a system. You cannot have mass tragedy without a system. And if you can give me a system, I can make a game. And just for a minute, take the concept, take the definition of what you perceive as a game, take that away. Right? Just imagine for a sec that a game doesn't equal fun, that it doesn't necessarily, although every one of these games does stand up on their own. I tested Train multiple times without any narrative. We're going to Disneyland and other things. But we don't necessarily have to abide by these things. And if you can give me a system, I can make a game. And so this is when I start thinking about Train. And Train, so for those of you who don't know what it's about, I'm going to tell you what it's about. But it's not a spoiler alert because there's many endings, truly, and there's multiple beginnings to Train. But I'm just going to tell you the narrative. So what I'm really trying to explore here is emotion. I really want to think about, we've talked about giving players emotion and making them feel emotion while they're playing a game. And for me, this was fascinating. So this dude, I'm sure many of you know, this is Jackson Pollock. And what we're looking at here is not a Pollock painting. We are looking at Pollock's stuff. If you see it up on the wall, I mean, Pollock's dead and gone now, right? But his stuff up on the wall isn't a painting. It's an artifact of an experience. It's an artifact of his painting experience. We're seeing it there on the canvas as if, somehow we could take a photograph or we could somehow save an ice rink after a hockey game has been played, right? And so that you could see, like maybe blood on the sides or whatever. That you would have sort of a very violent hockey game, apparently, but anyway, or maybe the average one. But so you could see like this actual expression of what had happened. And so I wanted to think about really what are the players going to walk away with? What would they feel about this game, and how could I make them feel these things? And so I was back to the thing about having players make meaningful choices and making sure that every one of my design decisions was also meaningful. So this is a picture from Train, and this is one of the boxcars. This is one end of the board, and for those of you who, I'll tell you the general way of play. It's a 3-player game, and each one of those people is worth 100,000. And your goal, so this is the game, is to get those people to the end of the tracks. And when you get them to the end of the tracks, well, actually, let me tell you what you can do on a particular turn. Every single turn, there's 4 actions you can take. You can roll the die and load people onto your train. You can move your train forward that amount. You can take a card or you can play a card. And the cards say things like hill. So a hill will make you go 3 times as fast. The game never tells you who you need to play it on. And in fact, the rules never refer to it as a game, and they also never refer to play. So when you get to the end, you take a terminus card, and the rules tell you to take the people out, multiply by 100,000, and then take the terminus card, which will tell you your destination. So one of the terminus cards is labeled Auschwitz. And in fact, all of the terminus cards are extermination camps, not just concentration camps. And so 100,000, people assume that's points, but there are 60 people in the game. 60 times 100,000 equals 6 million, which is how many Jews were killed in the Holocaust. And it is this fairly... It's a horrible moment when people get to the end of the game and they don't know what it's about because they're so psyched that they won, and it's literally this fall from 100 feet up, right? Just smashed because you have this whole group of people looking at you going, oh my God, you just killed, and they almost always say, you just exterminated 10 million Jews. Or not 10, sorry, you just exterminated 600,000 Jews or something like that. And so it's this amazing and tragic moment. Now, there's other plays to Train. Train is over when it ends, or so says the rules. And you can tell when you look at the game, there's not much that looks friendly about it, right? I mean, literally, you're pretty much seeing it as it is in its context when it's played. There's smashed glass everywhere. The players are invited to smash the glass if they want to. That's never happened until the last conference I was at when somebody actually asked for a hammer and did it. And I was so grateful somebody recorded. So they beat the glass. They smashed all the remaining glass out of it, which is fine. I came back and I was like, oh my God. But then it was okay. And an interesting point about the glass, oh my God, I'm running on reserve battery power. Hold on a sec. Where's my plug? Pro tip. If speaking at GDC, where the hell is my plug? What? It is plugged in? Oh, this is a GDC problem. Haha. GDC guy, your plug isn't working up here. No, it's plugged in. Hold on a sec. This plug down here is not working. The lectern is not active AC. You have to plug into the strip on the table. Pro tip. Okay, thanks. Is it going to reach? It's going to reach somehow. You can just fight amongst yourselves during this point in time, or I'll carry it. So anyway, so basically, I'm asked to bring Train. I'm asked to bring Train to this guy, and this is Rabbi Belzer. And to give you guys an idea, Rabbi Belzer, I didn't know who he was, as I've already mentioned. I made this game about Irish Catholics. So Rabbi Belzer, just to translate that to my world, he was telling me about when he met Cardinal O'Connor, and so I immediately went, oh. So Rabbi Belzer, I'm asked to bring Train to a rabbi. Now, you don't do the Holocaust okay. You either do it epically wrong or epically right. And so Rabbi basically questions me for 2 hours. Why is there only grass on one side of the tracks? Why this? How come this many spaces? Why did you do this? For 2 hours. My friend later told me that I had gone through the Jewish gauntlet and survived. And so what he does at the very end, he says, well, I'm going to say a blessing now. And so he blesses the game. It was in Hebrew, so I don't recall what he said. I didn't understand what he said. But then he says, and you've brought us something very special here, so I'm going to do a special blessing. This game is a work of Torah. And he actually does this very special blessing, and I'm just blown away. Like, you know, I've gotten Game of the Year awards, I've gotten lots of role-playing Game of the Year awards, but nobody's ever called my game a work of Torah. And if I literally get smashed by a bus after this, or if I live till I'm 90, I would be shocked if I ever get anybody that says anything that great about a game I made ever again. That is astonishing and humbling. So I basically spend the rest of my time with the rabbi crying, because I'm blown away by this. I can't believe, like, how did this happen? You know, like, I just wanted to do it right. I wasn't trying to create something that would be received that way, or that, you know, a couple of years later there would be people coming to hear me talk about this game. And so I ended up going to this conference called Project Horseshoe, which I've mentioned several times. And it's, like I said, it's this invite-only game design conference. And there we're doing it, so it was over breakfast, and there were a bunch of game designers. I remember John Sharp was there, and Moretsky was there, and Jason Rohr, and Olivier Lejade, and David Fox, and a bunch of others were at that end of the table. And so, what are you working on? And they're all working on, you know, commercial games at the time. And I said, well, I've got this. And so most of the I can't talk about it. Yeah, me neither. What? Okay. So now we come over to me, who the only person who can talk about our games. So what are you working on? So I say, I'm making this board game series. And Steve Moretsky says to me, what are you going to do with it? I said, I'm not going to do anything with it. And so if you know Steve says, well, you have to talk about it. And so he basically demands that I go talk about this game, and so it sort of extracts a promise, like, just, you promise me you're going to talk about it once. You're doing stuff with board games, and many of us, you know, veteran designers, you know, this is where our roots are. And so I make this agreement that, okay, I will talk about it. I'll talk about it once. Because this is an odd project, and frankly, you know, just imagine, hi, my name is Brenda Brathwaite, I'm making a game about the Holocaust. You know, like, this is not necessarily the way you want to introduce yourself, and frankly, the topics that I was covering, it made me feel, I don't know, a little afraid, even. But I agree, I'm going to talk about it once, and so I do. I talk about it at the Triangle Games Summit in a room of about 40 people. And during this part of the talk, as I'm discussing Train and why I did it, and I'm taking them through a verbal play test of the game, people are starting to cry, and they're leaving the room, and not because they're mad at me, right? And then later on, this woman comes back, and she gives me this huge hug and tells me that her husband is Haitian and that it had meant something to her. And what I didn't know is in this room of 40 in the back was a guy from The Escapist. And so the guy from The Escapist writes this article about how a board game can make you cry. And this was the date of the accidental release of this game. And so out Train goes, right? And I literally get amazing love. Like, this dude, Abe Stein, he played the game at MIT. I was invited to be trained at MIT, and he said, I mean, this just is astounding. Play Brenda Brathwaite's Train and forget what you think you know about games, and remember why in the grandest senses we are here. And remember, because remembering the very act of first knowing again is our most important human faculty. This is from somebody who's teaching at MIT. You know, like, I was blown away by the things that were said about Train. And I got a Vanguard Award. I mean, like, these are game designers who gave me an award for this window, right? This smashed glass window. And I was just blown away by the things that people said about this game, and the things that I was trying to do with it. And in case you're curious, well, I'm going to get into that. Anyway, right. But then there was also the hate. You're Brenda Brathwaite, stop making games, you're hurting games, and all these other things. And this is without playing it. And I think a lot of it is because you can look at Train, you know where the trains are going. You can see that they roll down the track. You can see that there's a die. You're a game designer. You make your own game. You can figure it out. And that's highly inaccurate, right? Like, that's probably the simplest playing of Train. Train is nothing like that. But I was devastated by these comments. Holy shit. Now, bear in mind, this is me having been in the industry for a long time. I've been hit with, I worked on the Playboy game, right? I mean, I've been hit with some criticisms, and I can handle them. But I've never had something like Brenda Brathwaite stop making games. So I called a friend of mine, and I was so floored by this because the insults had never been so personal. And the game was so incredibly personal, right? This wasn't a game that it was like behind the wall of Surtex Software or Atari or Microprose or any one of those. This was like behind the wall of my kitchen, right? It was nothing. And so it felt way more personal than other things. And so when I would read the criticism, it felt, I don't know, it felt more strong than it had ever felt before. And this is a recent one. So this I still am kind of flabbergasted by this. The type may be small, so I'll read it. After playing a version of Train, we decided we should punch you in the face. Bring it. No, seriously. But that's the Irish talking. Anyway, although we know what happened with Cromwell. So So the problem with this is, of course, I thought, wait a minute, you did it. So I responded, well, you tested Train? Because Train is in my apartment. There's one of them. And so they said, well, we figured out what the rules might be from looking at a picture of it, and we decided to play it. Well, yeah, I'd punch me in the face for that too. Anyway, so that was very odd. And a lot of the controversy comes from the typewriter. If you look at the 5 key, you can see the SS symbol there. So this is a real Nazi typewriter. And this is what I typed the rules to Train with. And it was disgusting. This typewriter is also in my apartment, and I still don't like it. They have glass keys, so you put your fingers on it, and it feels, if you've ever felt like an old glass typewriter, it feels beautiful, right? And except it's like, oh my God, because you know the stuff that was typed with this, and it's horrific. But the game, we forget maybe, at least I had, when I was making digital games, I forget about what the rules are, and the rules are the game. That is the single most important thing. Everything you're looking at, every single thing, all the pieces of grass, all the posts that's holding that stuff up, those are just decisions I make to bring those rules to life. But the rules are the thing. The rules are the game. And where else would the rules for a game about the Holocaust come from but a Nazi typewriter? And so once the idea was in my head, I had to go find a Nazi typewriter, which I found. Train cost, its development costs were skyrocketing at this point, and it ended up costing me $1,250 to make Train, 1,000 of which is right there. So then the press shows up, and the Wall Street Journal asked me to bring it. That picture's from when I bought, and this is ridiculous. You can't even fathom how astounded I was when the Wall Street Journal says, will you bring Train? And the Wall Street Journal would like me to bring my smashed window. Yes. And then Kotaku wrote about it in Gamma Sutra, and I've already mentioned that there was a follow-up article on Play This Thing, and basically I'm bringing it, it gets the Vanguard Award, and now I'm standing at GDC talking about it, and it's still just crazy. And I get invited to go to Games for Change and to bring it there, and MIT wants to know, will I bring it there, and all these other places, and I'm going to be bringing it to USC soon with my other games. And it feels like, in case you're wondering, how many people know who that guy is? Oh my God, Richard. So anyway, that's Lord British. Wow. Okay, so that's Lord British. And in the early 80s, right, Richard Garriott would be in his car, whatever it was, and I'd be in my car, and I'd have an Apple II, and I was lugging wizardry to the Boston Apple Users Group, and the Washington Apple Pie, and all these other things. And we would go, it was like the Dead on tour without any groupies, right? And we would run into each other at all these different places. And so I'm on the road with my games for about 3 weeks, and it's just me and my games, and it really honestly felt so like 1981 again. It was awesome. Except I was older and wiser. So there's other things that are not obvious about Train, right? You can't tell how it plays by the way it looks. Like this is me, I'm making the tracks, and I wanted to make sure, I could have bought them already pre-made, but that felt like cheating to me. I wanted to make sure that I really understood it. I can't tell you how many, if you've ever done any model railroading, you have my utmost respect. It took me so many efforts to get the tracks right. And other people who will say there's a trick ending to Train. No, there's not. There's so many multiple endings. Somebody recently won the game by preventing any transportation of Jews. So there's actually multiple win conditions for Train. And they have not all been discovered. And that there's only one way to play. And as I note there are multiple beginnings and endings. And I'll tell you, part of the reason why. So this is one of the cards in the game. It's called a derail, and one of the actions that you can take. And so the card derail says half the people go back to the starting gate, the others refuse to reboard. And this is done on purpose. I mean, I'm pretty ridiculous and stringent with rules. You're not going to find any rule holes, as you might call them, in my other games. But this particular thing, I did it deliberately, so they refuse to reboard. And what this ends up doing, if you guys have ever played board games, you know the moment when you say, shut up, give me the rules. Just give me the rules, because that's not what they mean. And now this process of rules lawyering begins. So I sort of decided to use rules lawyering as a game mechanic, because I could. And so they start talking about, well, where do they go? And so here's some things that have happened. People have said, well, clearly let's just put them back on the train. Other people have said they're dead. Another person has said these people are going to Denmark because they walked up to Train, they saw the window, they saw the smashed glass. They knew that was obviously crystal knocked. And they knew this, and the boxcars, the yellow people, they knew this game was about the Holocaust, and they decided to rescue as many people as they possibly could. And so that's literally just one of many gaps in the rules that create this form of procedural rhetoric between the player. Like you can see, it's a tiny little gap. You haven't got that far to go. But basically, in this single action, what I'm doing is making the player complicit. You are going to decide what's going to happen. You're going to find a way. Will you just literally pick up the rules and blindly follow them as you think they should be followed? Or are you going to try to find a way to work within them? And how will that affect you? So here's some different experiences that I had. I mentioned this one. Do you just blindly follow the rules? This is more or less, I set the game up differently depending on its environment, but more or less it looks like this. You have to literally get up and take the rules out of a Nazi typewriter. And that's obviously, that's by design. So do you literally just blindly follow these rules? I don't know how you guys would be like, if you approached a game with smashed glass, it's pretty daunting to look at. And then this is one of the more bizarre comments that's happened. And I can assure you it's not at all just like Halo. Anyway, when people get to the end, here's what often happens. And the game has ended a bunch of different ways, bearing in mind that Train says the game is over when it ends. So a completely valid playing of Train is one that a rabbi in New York City had, who walked up to the game and went, "Oh," and looked at me and said, "I know what your game is about. I don't want to play." And I said, "You just did." And she said, "You're right." And we had a great conversation after that. So with this particular thing, sometimes people get to the end and they'll flip over the card and they'll see one of the extermination camps, and then the game comes crashing down. But this particular woman, she said, "Okay," and she saw it, and it was Bergen, I think it was. So anyway, she flips it over, and there it is, and so it was Dachau. That was it. So she flips it over, and she puts her people out, and she pauses for a sec, and then she takes her train car and goes back to the beginning of the tracks, because it says you can do that in the rules. And so I'm thinking, maybe she doesn't know what this is. So I asked her where her people went to, and she repeats it, correctly. So I know she knows, and she says, "I know, it's an extermination camp, or a concentration camp." And she says, "Well, maybe I'm a guy, I'm a conductor, I've got a living to make, maybe I got 5 kids." It's just like Halo, right? And you can tell the people around the table are like, "Dear sweet God." And they don't want to play, and they want out of the game, and she wants to keep playing, and so they ended up, getting up to leave. People have started to cry while playing the game. They've started to cry while walking up to it, and some people have, approached it and walked away. There's never been a person who's played Train that has said it was stupid or insensitive. I mean, during the making of Train, I try to feel of it as much of it as I can. The research period for Train was 9 months. And during that time, for the last 6 months of that, I stared at a single picture of 2 children, and I imagined they were my children for at least an hour every single day. I did nothing but stare at that picture and think about what I would do if they were my kids. Now, granted, this is not even approaching the horrors that is the Holocaust. That is the Holocaust. I have no relatives who died in the Holocaust, so I know that I literally have a fraction of what that emotion is. But I tried to do it as good as I could. So I've already told you, this is sort of the, here's the people who have died. Some of them have gone to Denmark. Others just die right there. Sometimes people will also decide that they're just going to roll the dice and put them back on the train. And then there's also this play that once people play it once, they want to come back and watch other people play it. And they want to see what happens when they're doing it. And this is fascinating to me. So you can see the tokens there. And they at first don't particularly care. Like, the tokens are deliberately, the Jews are deliberately just too big to fit into the car. So you have to struggle to get them in. You have to struggle to get them out, obviously, by design. And so, initially when they put them in, they just stuff them in there because it doesn't matter. But when people realize that these are representative of people and they're representative of the Jews, it's fascinating because they take the boxcar and they reach in and they take them out gently, one at a time, and remove them. There's none of this like slam, 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 pour, pour, pour. And there's some kind of transformation. And then there's the discussion that follows this. And usually after a playing of Train, the discussion, I would say, at minimum is an hour. At MIT, it was 2, because it's MIT. And something, this is fascinating to me, absolutely blows me away. If you have any idea, send me an email after, because this is truly just, I don't understand this. And it speaks to the power of rules in games and how much we will blindly follow these particular rules. So in Train, it's obvious, there's one particular woman who said, they're going to Denmark. She figured out what this game was about, and almost always during a play, at least one person will figure out what this game is about. But nobody's ever told, nobody's ever said, holy shit, listen, this game is about the Holocaust, and we are taking these people to no place good. Let's stop playing. It's never happened, not once. When somebody knows about it, what they will try to do is they'll try to take their trains and derail their own train. Right? And all of a sudden, just imagine playing with a game, and now this person's playing against you, and now they're trying to take themselves out. right? And you're like, what the hell are you doing? So they're actually seeming to subvert the game. Their goal is originally to get to the end, and now they're trying to save everybody. And it's an incredibly frustrating experience for other players, but it has never once happened. And at this point in time, there's probably been about 100 plays of Train, and nobody's ever done this. And I've been there for almost every single one. I've missed maybe a few because I had somebody else there, but they would have told me if this had happened. And then the other things that happened. Who's publishing Train? I did. It's done. It's published. And why won't I program it? Well, let's take that derail action. How do you make room for the infinite variety of human choice? And it's not that I couldn't get it programmed. I can assure you a ton of people have asked me to. And, among my friends are some of the best programmers on the planet in this industry, really. If anybody could program it, I think they could. And they've said, you can't. And I wouldn't want to do it anyway. Like, why don't we digitize? Like, why don't we just take down Lavender Mist from the Smithsonian? Or we'll take a Richard Serra sculpture and just do it in polygons and have it on a screen, and that way we can share it with everybody. Like, why? I didn't want to do that. And then other things like, well, why don't you make a few of them? Because I don't want to. I wanted to make one. And that seemed like a particular weird luxury that I could allow myself. I made one. I wasn't intending to mass produce Train and ship it all over the world. And then, well, you could make money. People know about this. I will make games if somebody prohibits me from making games. Somebody asked me the other day over lunch, what would you do if you weren't making games? Like, pretend you couldn't make games anymore. And I literally looked and genuinely meant it, well, then what would I do? I don't have any idea what the hell I would do for a living if I didn't make games. I would talk about making games. I did that for a little while, but then I still made games because I couldn't stop it. I would probably just have to lock myself up and be on some form of drug. Anyway. So then I decided to make 3 more. And the games that I'm making, there's one called Mexican Kitchen Workers, which is about illegal immigration. Basically the math in the game is pegged to the fines in the government for hiring illegal immigrants. And if you do not hire illegal immigrants, you cannot win the game. It is impossible for your restaurant to beat mine without hiring illegal immigrants. And then this is the one I'm currently working on. This one's called One Falls for Each of Us, and there's eventually going to be 50,000 of those. Those are Indians, and there'll be 50,000 of those. I'm doing a literal 1-to-1 for the Trail of Tears. And if you check on Wikipedia or somewhere, you're going to find out that, no, they say it's not 50,000 Indians, but one of the things I have learned in researching historical events is the math is often a lie. So I figure I'm erring on the side of caution. I'm sure nobody, let's make sure these Indians were represented right. I bet more died than that. So that's all the people who were forced to leave their lands and to go to Oklahoma. And so this is all great. You have your 50,000 Indians, but what the hell does this have to do with the digital world? And it comes back to this team and how it's relevant. And one of the things that I've learned as a game designer is board games, that there's already a lot of solutions in those games. We talk about how people are surprised about harvesting mechanics taking over Facebook games. Harvesting mechanics blew through Germany about 20 years ago. And so there's a lot of stuff that we can learn from board games, and the concept of pseudo-socialization and asynchronous play and pseudo-synchronous play and synchronous play. This sort of stuff is old hat in that industry, and people made worlds before electricity. And I saw, seriously, the wide, huge ocean of topics we could cover with games. If you can make a game about the Holocaust, you can make a game about anything. Anything at all. And games don't have to be just about purely, fun topics. Like, everybody has to have fun. Why? Why couldn't they come there for an experience? I don't go into a film. I didn't go see Magnolia, and I know this is an older film, but I remember that movie really moved me. And it wasn't like, I didn't have fun in that movie. God damn it, it sucked. I didn't feel that way, right? When people don't, there's a huge range of human experience. And why do we feel as game designers we have to smash ourselves into only this realm? And the funny part of it is some of the games that we find the most revolutionary had nothing to do with fun. They scared the shit out of us. And we loved it, right? I mean, half the first-person shooter genre, well, that would be the good half, is based on that. And so then, I started to think about constraints that I'd accepted unknowingly over the years, that I just knew games had to be fun and that games had to have total concrete conditions and that I had to catch the player every single place and that maybe I couldn't let them have a chance to make up some of their own stuff. And it really made me think about the tactile. So just imagine, I'm in my kitchen. My kitchen right now is being overrun by these Indians. And by the time I'm done, I've got a real issue. I'm going to have 50,000 Indians in my apartment. And I don't know what I'm going to do with this, but it's the way I have to make this game. I really seriously don't know what to do about it because now it's going to be ridiculous. Hello, come visit me. There's nowhere to sit. Have a nice day. So I started to think about actually being in touch with every part of the game. Imagine literally touching every part of the game you're working on now. Every part, every line of code, all the art, all the design, all the rules, everything. you touched it all, really, with your hands. And it's amazing to have that kind of connection with the game. And then, we've gotten away from just us and the player, but literally in this, it's just me and the player. When I'm playing these games and I'm making these games, I'm just thinking about that player. I'm not thinking about that publisher with that milestone or the stakeholders or any of this sort of stuff. It's just me and the player. And I really saw that games, like when I saw somebody cry, and not just one time, but many times, when I saw that happen, holy cow, that's just astounding to me, that game mechanics can do that. That I work in a medium that I think is way more powerful than paint, because you can touch it and interact with it, you can be a part of it, you make the experience that comes out of that. That doesn't happen with a painting unless you've got some degree of literacy. And then again, if I walked up and said, I just want to get that cigarette butt out of the Pollock painting, I don't think he meant for it to be there. Can you imagine? I would be locked up, So this actually gives you an opportunity to create these things. And I also learned that it was all right to take a wild chance. And this is absolutely so funny. I want to choke up every friggin' time I think about this. You have no idea the amazing support. If you are not a game designer and you are trying to become one, if you're trying to get into this industry, fight tooth and nail. Go home and start making games now, because the best friends you will ever have in your life are game designers in this industry. They are shockingly supportive. So when I just what's Brenda making a game about now? Oh, the Trail of Tears, the destruction of 50,000 Indians. Awesome. I can't wait to hear about it. This is a great group of people who have supported me in taking a fairly serious artistic leap. I remembered that games could be more than this. And also design challenges I've never confronted, ever. And now with that, I feel much more equipped to confront other things. I spent a ton of time thinking about game design. This current game that I'm working on, I've been working on it not full time, but it's in my head all the time anyway, but probably for 6 months now. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about design, what am I going to do with 50,000 Indians? How do I transport them around? Am I going to leave the game in Oklahoma? What will happen with the game? How do I store this game? I'm not really sure, and I don't care. The answers will show up. But the key part is that I absolutely, truly fell in love with game design again. And there is nothing. So, bear in mind, I went to teach for 3 years. There is nothing I will ever do. It's my warning. I hope I am coming to GDC when I'm 80 and people point at me and they don't know me, and that's so totally okay, because if I can get away with doing this from the time I was 15 years old to the time I get in the grave, I will have lived the most blessed life ever. That is it. Thank you. Thank you. Wow. You ruined my makeup. Whew. Holy cow. Thank you. See, I told you they're the best friends you could ever have. Okay, we have 3 minutes for questions. Go, quick. And you wrecked my makeup.
You wondered why people never tell, and I have a possible explanation. The people who are privileged to play your game are also the sort of people who, when they realize what that game is doing, also realize what that game is telling them, and that experience of figuring out and getting it is the most important part, and they don't want to ruin it for the other players.
Yeah, I think there might be something to that. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, this is good stuff. I was just wondering, so one of the things that seems really different about these board games as opposed to digital games is that, one of the things that's really interesting about a board game like Train is that you have this ability to violate the rules. Really, there's a certain way that, you can actually break the rules of the game by choosing not to play it or choosing not to follow them. But that's not something you can do with a digital game. Because in a digital game, it seems to me that you can't help but follow the rules. So how would you want to explore these sort of issues about complicity with rules and sort of in a digital game as opposed to something on a
I would say the answer to that is yet. We could consider a mod as a huge breaking of the rules. That's where people who are programming, you could reprogram something. I know plenty of people who have done things with first-person shooters, that clearly their designers never intended for that to happen, but they left the back door there so that anybody could do those things. But I know that there are programmers who are considering, basically I know, how many of you guys are programmers? All right. How many of you guys are also thinking, oh no, I bet I could program train? Oh, haha. Okay, so, but somehow, some way, I think that we are going to allow that sense of freedom in a game. And even if you look at the large social structures that are in MMOs, the emergent behavior between the players is sort of allowing emergent rules to develop, and those rules are sort of being broken. But I think games will get there, and we don't have to have games. Games don't just have to be digital, right? I don't know if anybody from Boston who would not murder somebody if we didn't suggest that baseball wasn't also a game, right? So there's all kinds of room for us to grow. Okay, we can do one more, but I've got business cards up here, so you can shoot me an email if you want.
Hello. This is a two-part design decision question about Train and the way you've constructed it. The first part is, what inspired the decision to not include the omission of the people who obviously didn't make it through the train system? They merely collapsed from exhaustion or hunger or fatigue, and that was killing them. The other one was another choice of omission is the omission of the everyone is wearing yellow. They're obviously representative of the Jew star that they were forced to wear, and but of the Catholics, homosexuals, gypsies, cripples, political dissidents. What was the choice? Is that for the sake of iconoclasm, or is that what was the conscious decision behind that?
So an interesting point about Train, and I've debated this. This has come up enough that I'm seriously thinking about it. I've already seriously thought about it. I decided that I wanted to make it just about a singular experience, the experience of the Jews in the Holocaust. But that doesn't mean that it's the only experience, and I've actually thought about creating mod packs for the Catholics, for the homosexuals, really, so it'd just basically be a bag that contained all the other people, which I feel would be a more representative experience of the Holocaust altogether. So that was that decision. I just wanted to keep it fairly narrow. Like, there were other people, when Cromwell rolled across the north of Ireland, he didn't just take out Irish Catholics. But I decided to make that about my family's history and how we end up coming to America at some point, and Barbados via the father of my kids. And so I just wanted to make it a singular experience, and that's why I did that.
All right. If you choose to make the mod packs, I highly recommend that you just leave them on the side and let people choose to put them in or not.
Yeah, that's what I would do. All right. Thank you, everybody.